Our schedule tonight is as follows. Mr. Yarvin and Mr. Shapiro will pick sides, and I will flip a coin to determine speaking order. The winner of that coin toss will speak first for 5 minutes, succeeded by his opponent. Initial speeches will be followed by rebuttals, and then each speaker will have the opportunity to ask one question of his opponent, followed again by replies, and then closing speeches. After the debate is concluded, there will be a 20-minute Q&A period. The clock here will indicate time. There, there. If either speaker goes over time, I will gavel once at the overtime point and continue to gavel if they continue. Mr. Yarvin, what is your preference tonight for heads or tails?
Heads.
The coin is tails. Mr. Shapiro, take it away.
I'll receive. I'm delighted to be here. It was a very easy invitation to accept. I've been curious about the University of Austin since I first heard about it, and I'm just very excited about your first class, which of course means that this whole impressive setup, this whole campus group event is being run not just by students, not just by undergraduate students, but by freshmen. That's just amazing. I'm really impressed. There is one disadvantage, however, in that I think the strongest thing they're serving tonight is sweet tea. I typically find the more alcohol my audience has had to drink, the wittier I am, but we'll have to make do regardless. And my final kind of preliminary observation is that I'm just a simple constitutional lawyer. So this is kind of a heady topic to discuss. The optimal system of government for capitalism. I'm not an economist. I didn't take any philosophy classes in college, so I had to do a lot of research and figure this stuff out. I have that trite Churchillian throwaway phrase that democracy is the worst system of government except all others. But what does that mean about markets? Is it the best system for capitalism? Well, look, for one thing, as I was doing my research, I found that it seems like all think tanks agree that it is. It's really remarkable. I mean, I'm not going to get into the nerdy technical weeds, but Cato, Heritage, the Fraser Institute, the Brookings Institution, the Niskanen Center. I mean, any think tank I looked at apparently has a study out showing how democracy or electoral government is the best system for economic growth. Let's put it that way. So that's good. And then, it's kind of understandable why that would be. Markets are constituted by politics. Homo economicus doesn't live in a vacuum. Homo politicus is, right there in the same being. There are no disembodied markets or disembodied democracies. Free markets channel the desire for private gain into bettering all people's lives. I'm wearing my Adam Smith tie and Adam Smith cufflinks, right, the invisible hand. But similarly, democracy promotes political compromise rather than violence through mechanisms that convert dueling interests into policies that serve the common good, the invisible political hand, if you will. Historically, the more democracy you have within, I'm going to caveat this, I'm not going to talk about pure democracy, with Republican bounds, the kind of, the American idea of rights and freedoms being the supreme value, not democracy itself. That's a means to an end. And we have all these constitutional structures, which we can get into if you like. But it's simply not the case that, whether you're talking about China now, whether you're talking about other authoritarian systems, monarchies, what have you, do better at fomenting economic growth, let alone capitalistic economic growth, than democracies, for all their warts. And I'm sure Curtis is going to give lots of examples of, crony capitalism and failures and all this. And, my response to that, I think, is that, those are failed democracies. Those are failed republics. They don't have the rules of the game set out. Rule of law is very important, as I can get into. At the end of the day, I want to leave you with this to conclude my opening statement. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Now, at a place like this, I'm sure you're all aware, that's Federalist 51, James Madison. And the ultimate point here is that, if we had some benevolent despot, some utopian angelic ruler, if that's the kind of monarch that Curtis wants to posit, fine, I agree, I concede. But we're in the real world where it's men governing men, and so, we're left with the worst system of government except all others.
All right, is this the... I'm sorry, I'm really terrible at this. I've actually never done one of these structured debates. Usually I just rant. So you'll have to forgive me if I fuck this one up. But when I saw the topic, I didn't choose the topic of the debate, and I don't think Ilya did either. And when I saw the topic, debating is hard. Debating a trained constitutional lawyer who's argued. Have you argued before the court? You've only prepared briefs. Fortunately, he's not a litigator, so I have some chance. So there are some questions that are easy, and there are some questions that are hard. There's a way to pitch a question that I have an innate advantage, and I looked at this question and I'm like, unfortunately, this question doesn't just give me an advantage, it gives me a ridiculous advantage. Because, people spent a lot of time in the 20th century debating what economic system was best for democracy, because big thing in the 20th century, democracy. To sort of, whether it was socialism or capitalism, right? I don't really think capitalism is really a real word in a sense, in that it just indicates the absence of socialism. It's like capitalism is not really an ism, it's just something that people will do naturally unless you stop them. Important libertarian point, sorry. But to question whether what system of government is best for capitalism seems to be a very remarkable question to me, if only because if you have anything electronic, any device, anything any modern gadget in your possession, look on the back, you will see that it says "Made in Democracy." And oh wait, it doesn't. So I think one of the great miracles of governance in the late 20th century, to take an essentially historical framework, is certainly the reconstruction of China by Deng Xiaoping. And in particular, the introduction of capitalism into what was effectively not only an absolute dictatorship, but a deranged absolute dictatorship, because Mao was one of the craziest ones. And Deng Xiaoping takes this desperately poor country and turns it into the absolute industrial powerhouse of the world. And that's something that we ought to regard. I think that one way to answer that question is a story I tell sometimes, just in terms of observing the world. My great-grandfather Roy Heath coined the slogan on I-95 that says, "Trenton makes the world takes." And you drive across that bridge and it says, "Trenton makes the world takes." And if you have any historical knowledge, you might be like, oh yeah, this place was once like China. This place once made everything, and that's why this slogan makes sense. And now I think they ought to just change it to "Trenton spends, the world lends." So to hear from the system, we can get into the question of democracy or what it means. The actual question of the debate is which system works better for capitalism. And I'm pretty sure that most people would rather run a company in China than in New Jersey. And that's why the Pearl River Delta makes everything we have, even though it was just rice fields 40 years ago. And, New Jersey has turned into just darkness. How much time do I have left? Does anyone have a... 2 more minutes. All right.
Although that was a good end.
No, I have 2 minutes, dog. No. I just started. So in my 2 minutes, let me kind of briefly summarize the kind of perspective. Let me answer for myself, in my own opinion, what this sort of weird Marxist word capitalism is, because in the way Marx is the inventor of capitalism. But what I mean when I think of capitalism, and I think that the invention of capitalism, finally let's use the word, I'm actually such a passionate capitalist that I don't even think England had an industrial revolution. I think it had a capitalist revolution. I think it was the invention of the joint stock company, to be exact, that really triggered and really blew off and now, I'm not an economic historian of the time, that's just a hypothesis. It's just that they happened at the same time, and it's just the Romans never found this form. And what capitalism is a kind of virtual sovereignty that is under the sovereignty of the state. You've created a kind of second level of sovereignty where you have these contending independent units that they're their own little kingdoms. They don't fight each other with troops. OpenAI does not send its forces to the headquarters of Anthropic. They fight each other in the marketplace, but it has this beautiful Darwinian effect of creating the optimum profit-making machine. And that's what I think of as capitalism.
Sure. New Jersey has a lot of problems in public policy. There's a reason why, there's been a transfer of economic might within America, and manufacturing might, for that matter, from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt. That's a problem of domestic public policy. That doesn't really speak to this question of what benefits capitalism. And I don't think you can describe what's going on in China as capitalism either. It's kind of this managed, you have limited types of economic freedom to do this kind of high volume manufacturing, but that's a little different than just what is better for greater economic growth or development of economic flourishing, or flourishing more broadly, but we'll limit it to economics for the purposes of this debate. And it's a reason why Apple, to talk about the Pearl River Delta and manufacture in China, what is the greater value add? Is it what China is making there, whether with Apple or with Temu or your kids' toys or whatever, or is it what America is doing, meaning creating, innovating the iPhone or all these other things, and then at the back end, marketing, supply, all of that sort of thing, making it go viral and all of that. I would posit that it's what America is doing, and that's a higher form of capitalism. That's a better capitalism. We shouldn't wish to say the resolution is what is better for industrial revolution style capitalism when we had other kinds of democracy in the first place. So anyway, the point is, I thought that Curtis would go more into his theory about how countries are like businesses and you need a CEO. So I'll save that perhaps for later about why they're not, why that's a category error, as philosophers put it. But instead just say that I don't think China, with its huge inequalities, economic inefficiencies, and all the rest of it, is really that shining counterexample to kill the idea that electoral government, Republican democracy, whatever you want to call it, is better for capitalism.
All right, a lot to unpack there. Let's go. I think it's, have you been to China? I haven't either, but I've read about it.
I did spend 4 years in New Jersey, though.
In case anyone mistakes me, for a supporter of Elon Musk, who I've never, or a stooge of Elon Musk, who I've never actually met. I disagree with him very strenuously on many subjects, namely Mars. I believe I'm not interested in Mars, and my reason for not being interested in Mars is that if Mars was anywhere on Earth, it would be the worst place on Earth. In fact, if it was right next door to Camden, New Jersey, you'd rather live in Camden. So, all right, I feel like I've used up, enough of my time on humor. Let's talk a little bit more about this analogy. Now that we've heard the analogy between businesses and countries, let's go a little forward into the question of how a country is like a business. And I think that, there are, of course, a lot of differences at the sovereign layer. The realities of organizing a large number of people to solve a problem are the same, whether it's a country, a business, an army. In fact, you'll notice that, even films have directors. Even restaurants have chefs. People naturally form into this, essentially pyramidal, hierarchical org chart in which every node in the organization has a mission, is given certain resources that are nodes under him or her to fulfill the mission, and assigns, submissions to those subordinates. So the captain says to the lieutenant, take that hill, but if he says how to take that hill, that's micromanagement and it's bad. And that pyramidal structure basically extends all the way up to, again, this is a military term like mission orders, unity of command. And essentially, with a military whose job is completely different both from a government and from a company, you see again that basically it has that same purpose. And then the ultimate question, and this is the question that we really should get into here, is absolute monarchy is certainly one kind of monarchy that can work. Here are two examples of an absolute monarchy. The New York Times, fifth generation hereditary absolute monarchy, and Facebook, or rather Meta. Both of these companies have asymmetric share structures that give the founders essentially absolute power. They seem to work fine. I have some criticisms of both companies actually, but they seem to work fine, and neither is going to Mars. And so then beyond that, you have a board of directors, a corporate governance, or as I like to say, accountability structure, and that's the really important thing.
Mr. Shapiro, you now have the opportunity to ask Mr. Yarvin one question. You'll have 2 minutes to respond.
How are businesses like countries if their goal is simply to produce whatever their widgets are and make money for their shareholders, rather than providing services and kind of guaranteeing the rules of the game for the entire society?
All right, I would say easy question. The goal of a business, I would sort of state more broadly as maximizing the value of its assets. And in the analogy between a business and the country, the assets of the country are the land and its people, or as some might say, hate to use this phrase, blood and soil. And so when you basically perceive the mission of a country as maximizing the value of its assets, that is, its land and its people, including buildings, whatever, it's essentially maximizing its capital. And one of the things that you see in countries that are run according to mercantilist principles as opposed to Adam Smith free trade principles, such as, again, China, you'll see that China is very much run like a business. It's sort of like the way Amazon, turned no profit for the first 20 years of its existence because its goal was to grow the business. Its goal was to maximize the value of its assets. China also is being run to maximize the value of its assets, to maximize the productivity of its productive sector. And in this analogy, by the way, a trade surplus or deficit is a P&L sheet for the company. This is how, for the country, this is how mercantilism thinks. So what you're seeing is that China has developed this enormous productive, infrastructure, without the wacky Californians at Apple who do wacky things. Chinese people could be wacky too. I think we'll see some creativity there. But, what you're seeing is a country run not in order to maximize the the utility it gives to its people as consumers, which is what it means to maximize GDP. It is not run on utilitarian economics. It is run on mercantilist, basically Elizabethan economics. And the result is that it's created this incredible productive sector and has clearly maximized the value of its assets.
Mr. Yarvin, you now likewise have the opportunity to ask Mr. Shapiro one question.
God, but I have so many. How long do I have to ask the question? I'm thinking. Okay.
Yes, the Dormant Commerce Clause is real
So-
and should be.
So, yeah, I have a question about, there was one of the theories you referred to recently, which is, I confess at first seems to be very, very strong evidence for democracy is the general success and stability of democracies across the last 200 or so years. And I think that, if you look at the last 200 or so years, democracy looks pretty good. I would say, however, that there's another interpretation of these effects, which is that when you're measuring the success of a system, you of course need to include exogenous effects on that system. And there was a paper that came out recently, I forget the...
Is there a question?
There is a question. There was a paper that came out recently that was basically like, it sort of examined the advantages seen in democratic countries. And then it says, wait a second, what if we subtract an effect from this? And the effect that we subtract is that all democratic countries are enemies of all non-democratic countries. So if you're basically a country that bucks the system of the US and Britain in the 19th or 20th century, your results have to be evaluated with respect to the fact that your enemy is the British Empire and the American system, basically the international community in the last 200 years. So these numbers have to be, or these outcomes have to be adjusted for the fact that if you're not a democracy in the last 200 years, you basically have democracy trying to wipe you out at all times by any means necessary.
What's the question?
The question is, are the advantages of being a democracy that we like to look at in the last 200 years really just advantages of being in the extended, British Empire fantasy universe? AKA the international community.
Well,
you know what I'm talking about when I talk about
it's kind of
continuity of the international community and the British Empire.
the co-prosperity sphere or something. But it's kind of simplistic to say, the countries aligned with the big power, the big, kid on the block are going to prosper. Those that aren't won't. During the Cold War, there was a real question about which system was better, and you had competing blocks, and ultimately they crashed because of lack of adaptability and innovation and what have you. You would think that if countries were businesses, especially those that are autocracies, that they could be more nimble and compete and bury you, as Khrushchev said. So I don't buy the idea that, I think the causation arrow goes the other way. It's not that the opponents of the British Empire and then the American Empire are they're poor because they're not democracies because they're opposed to America. Anyway, the causation arrow works differently. It's not that they're opposed to America and therefore they're not democratic and therefore they're opposed to America. I think they're opposed to America and therefore they're not democratic.
Mr. Shapiro, you now have 5 minutes for your next reply speech.
My next reply speech, okay. See, I don't deal with these structures either. I haven't argued at the Supreme Court. I have argued in other courts, and it works a little differently as well. I've also never argued at the Oxford or Cambridge unions, but I have argued at the Yale and Amherst unions, for whatever that's worth. But anyway, this is all. Look, as far as I understand, this comes down to it's kind of orthogonal, this debate, really, because I'm for both democracy and capitalism, and Curtis seems to be for neither. I'm not exactly sure. So we could be talking past each other a little bit, or at least our ultimate goals might be. But if we're talking about what benefits economic growth, what benefits, well, if we understand that capitalism is the best system for generating economic growth, because of the invisible hand, because of these, as long as you have the rules of the game that are harnessing various economic efficiencies, I think it's, China is the Tom Friedman model. If only we can have dictatorial policies for a day, we'll be able to right the ship and all that. But you look under the hood, and China may well be on the downslope because of its long-time one-child policy, because of their different economic zones. It's not a happy place you'd want to be, even if you're a businessman. You might want to have some of your manufacturing there because it's cheaper, cheaper inputs, very basic. But for an overall innovation, economic-driven system, it's hard to see, even if you look at kind of benevolent despots, even before the last 200 years, that those systems wouldn't have been improved if there had been more freedom for the people, the kind of freedom that democracies allow, and autocracies of whatever kind, including the New York Times or Meta or what have you, which, by the way, cannot be analogized, because setting aside the question of whether the New York Times is actually successful now or not, it does have that weird hereditary CEO thing. I guess it's kind of a half closely held corporation. I don't know. But anyway, it's the accountability networks are different. I'm throwing in too much here. I'll just rest on the idea that for now, until we're all living in the metaverse with AI running other things, at least you still can't beat a system of government that has legitimacy drawn from the people.
All right, 5 minutes. All right, so let me talk quickly. I'll devote some of my time to a response and some of my time just to educating people in my bizarre theories. Right. Let me talk quickly about accountability in a monarchy, because it's a super interesting question, and it's kind of the crux of the question. Because first of all, I think any system of accountability in government has to fundamentally rest on a multipolar world order in some way. I think, a unified world order, I don't know that it's possible to build an accountability system that I would trust with a single world emperor. So just to be clear, I'm against anyone being a single world emperor. However, you can still engineer these things, and the board of directors design is a really beautiful design. The key to the board of directors structure, then why it works so well in corporate life, is that the directors are typically not, at least the independent directors are typically not involved in running the company. And so they don't get involved in office politics. They're sort of just looking at results from a very high level and basically saying, do we need a new CEO or don't we? Now, if we consider the Chinese Communist Party as an accountability mechanism, which is essentially what they have there, in their system for selecting the next, dictator, which used to be slightly temporary, there's a number of things you can say for it. For example, the CCP is very much a meritocracy. I don't even think they do any race stuff. Actually, that's not true. They have programs for minorities in China, believe it or not. Chinese minorities. So nobody's perfect. But,
on supremacy, as far as I know.
No. Very much the opposite. That was part of the, there is affirmative action there. It's frightening. It's everywhere. But not at the University of Austin. And in any case, So it's a kind of accountability mechanism. It's actually, it's a little bit shitty. One way to basically actually sort of mathematically understand the level of freedom here and there, who has more rights. Forget the rights of people, forget human rights. Let's look at who has to RHLF their AIs more. Which AI is more censored, Anthropic or DeepSeek? Right? Ask DeepSeek about Tiananmen Square. It'll fuzz the question a little bit. It'll be like, I don't want to talk about that. Right? So the Chinese system is really not perfect.
I have no idea what he just said. Simple constitutional law.
I had explained, but it would take away too much time. Anyway, so the Chinese system is by no means perfect. And one of the huge differences between, of course, we actually saw as China and Russia, the two ways you take a basically communist system and you add capitalism in China, and then you add democracy in Russia. And in Russia, actually, they developed the word, in Russia, democracy is demokratia. But after the Yeltsin period, in which this experiment was literally tried of which system is better in Russia, authoritarianism or the USSR. And after there's no controlled experiments, but the result was that Russian developed this new word, dermokratia, where dermo means shit. Because the Yeltsin period was really shit. So, ask someone, hey, wow, in New Jersey we get, New Jersey spends the world rents. In Russia we get Yeltsin. I'm seeing a pattern here, right? And then when the Chinese were so secure in their government, in the security of their regime, that they said, we can introduce this other layer of sovereignty without it getting out of control. Lenin tried that, actually, in the new economic policy. He tried capitalism in Russia in 1922, I think. It worked great. It worked so well that he was terrified of it and had to turn it off. And because it threatened his sovereignty. And the Chinese, Deng Xiaoping, is like, no, we can do capitalism and it doesn't threaten the government. So here's another thing. Here's the worst example of absolute monarchy in the world today. I thought you'd bring this up. Kim Jong-un. Understanding monarchical quality and monarchical accountability requires understanding not just, Hitler, but also Kim Jong-un, who's living right now today, he could be watching. And why doesn't Kim Jong-un do capitalism in his country? He can see it right across the border in China. It works pretty well. You got companies, you got all this stuff. And I think the answer is that he feels he's not secure enough. And if he opened up a little bit, it would sweep him away. And why would it sweep him away? Well, it would sweep him away because he has a pretty big enemy in the United States. And I basically, if you basically took the opposite of US foreign policy, and you said to Kim Jong-un, I'm going to use some points here, and you said to Kim Jong-un, hey, we recognize you as a king, okay? We're going to stop saying your regime is illegitimate. It is illegitimate. You're the emperor of Korea. We support you. We're not going to try to overthrow your regime. Now, why don't you adopt the policy of Frederick the Great, who said about civil liberties, it's very simple. They say what they want. I do what I want. We'll let you do what you want. You can have free speech and capitalism and still be the emperor of North Korea. He was educated in Switzerland. He'd go for that like this, and you'd basically free North Korea like tomorrow by adopting the exact opposite of US foreign policy, which is to promote democracy.
Mr. Shapiro, you have 5 minutes to give a closing speech.
I'm not sure it's been US foreign policy to promote democracy in quite some time, and that didn't work so hot with the Arab Spring and all the rest of it. I also disagree that China is capitalistic. There's economic growth in China, absolutely, but the rate of growth is already slowing because it has population issues, age, demographic pyramid issues, not to mention, housing crisis. I mean, all of these lots of problems. You can't avoid a crisis when you are trying to manage things all the time. And yeah, absolutely, this is shown anywhere. Fidel Castro, when he relaxed restrictions on the managed economy, things grew. Same thing, as you said, the new economic program and all that, because capitalism freedom, economic freedom threatens political dictators. But that is kind of arguing the reverse. Is more capitalism better for political freedom? And I think the answer there is generally yes, which is why dictators have to put a cap on it. But why is democracy better? I mean, you introduce foreign policy, that is, other kind. You have to control for foreign policy. Even given a given level of foreign policy, what kind of system of government is going to do better for capital, for a system of economic freedom where people are allowed to innovate and create and have dynamic, creative destruction and all of this sort of thing. China's not very good at innovating. It's good at stealing and it's good at producing. That's again not capitalism. That's kind of replication or what have you. I don't know what AI is going to do to this one way or another. Again, that's beyond my pay grade. But at the end of the day, again, paraphrasing Madison, if men were angels, we wouldn't need to think about what system of government is best for facilitating human flourishing. If angels ruled over men, it wouldn't matter. And since neither is the case, we better choose a system of government that allows markets to grow by giving people agency over their political and, in turn, economic life of the nation.
Do I have more time?
You have 5 more minutes.
Oh, amazing. I thought.
And then we move to the interpretive dance portion.
Yes. Of course, Trump is the greatest president ever in his interpretive dance. So I got to do the Trump dance. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about in the remaining time. We've heard a lot from Professor Shapiro. Do I get to call you Professor?
I'll allow it.
All right. We've heard
actually Professor Emeritus from Georgetown.
Emeritus. Wow. Yeah, you've got a pretty low Norwood score for an emeritus.
I don't know what that is, but it was a joke.
It was a joke. And you're awfully young to be a professor emeritus. Dare I say it? And so I'm impressed. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about, you keep using this word economic growth, and I'm not sure. Well, I do know what it means. Actually, it means an increase in GDP. And maybe you're not an economist, but I sort of wanted to go into that a little bit because I feel like a lot of terms have been, not least democracy. I mean, the great thing about democracy, as I always say, is I mentioned North Korea. The legal name of North Korea is the DPRK. That's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That is 3 euphemisms for democracy in one place name.
And you live in the People's Democratic Republic of Berkeley, I believe.
I do, right near People's Park. And in any case, this question of growth. So what is this growth that we refer to, right? And for me, this is entirely within. I'm a mercantilist, and this is entirely within the utilitarian school of economics. Both the U.S. and the USSR both do this GDP thing. This was not a statistic that anyone had heard of before, the early 20th century. And yet they managed to have economies and even capitalism. So let's dig into sort of what this statistic means for a moment, because it's clearly what you mean by growth, right? Increasing GDP. So GDP, when you're measuring GDP, you're essentially measuring the amount of money, the raw GDP, unadjusted GDP, is the amount of money spent by all consumers to all producers. You draw a line through the economy, you say, what crosses that line? That's GDP. Now, that money you spent is assumed to correspond to utility, which is basically, satisfaction of desire, and then you're supposed to adjust it hedonically over time because it's actually supposed to measure how much actual utility, actual satisfaction of desire this economy is generating. So, what you're basically seeing is that what GDP is defining as the purpose of an economy, is the purposes of a productive sector. You're basically measuring how much satisfaction of desire can this economy generate. What's very interesting here is the connection between GDP and modern, utilitarian economics and Buddhism. So most people don't realize this, but actually Buddhism has the same goal as utilitarian economics because they're both concerned with the same thing, which is desire. And the Buddha said that the conquest of desire is the most important, task in human nature. And that's exactly what utilitarian economics is. It says that basically the goal is to conquer desire, and as the Buddhist said, the only way to conquer desire is to satisfy. Oh wait, it's not to satisfy it. Okay. Actually, utilitarian economics seems to be kind of the opposite of Buddhism. And this is kind of interesting given that America is pretty Buddhist these days. Americans, we have a lot of stuff. We have a lot of cool stuff. With AI, we're getting into Wall-E world pretty fast. And yet we basically see that as the sort of demand for the things for human labor, for the things that humans can do, the sort of meaning of humans drops. And I think ultimately, if we go back to the question of the corporation as the owner of the land and its people, ultimately by producing more and more cool stuff for our people, we're not increasing the value of these assets in any way. Actually, we're decreasing them. And so when you look at the perspective of China, for example, for all its faults, and there are many, when basically China manages its economy, it undervalues its currency. When it undervalues its currency, it's lowering the prices of its exports, obviously good for business, but it is also damaging the ability of its exporting people to consume because they get fewer renminbi for their dollars. And so, essentially, China Inc. is saying we're going to lower its prices, we're going to lower our salaries to the people we pay, and because actually increasing their salaries and letting them buy more and more luxuries is not actually an advantage to anyone, maybe even not them. When you calculate GDP, one of the craziest things we did for GDP recently was we legalized sports gambling. I don't know, there's a Supreme Court decision or something, freedom of speech, I don't know, something, huge increase in GDP. Utility, a lot of people have their desire satisfied by sports gambling. You know how you could generate really a lot of satisfaction of desire? There's this stuff called carfentanil. It's an elephant tranquilizer. You could hold enough of in your hand to make the entire American population happy for a year. And for certain values of the word happy, oh no, they would desire it. It would satisfy their utility. And so the thing is, that's a reductio ad absurdum to this whole concept of GDP and growth. I admit that it's a reductio ad absurdum, but the thing is, the existence of one black swan proves that not all swans are white. And so if this reductio ad absurdum exists, maybe the concept itself is flawed.
Can I have a Sir rebuttal or something?
Can we give him a Sir rebuttal?
I think we can make an exception.
Let's make an exception. Let's give him a Sir rebuttal.
I'm not making the claim that economic growth is the only or even the primary goal or should be of a nation, a democracy or otherwise. I am saying that capitalism, I thought we were stipulating to this, maybe we're not, but that capitalism is the best economic system for producing economic growth, so that to the effect that we care about having a wealthy, flourishing economically society, we want to have capitalism, and therefore, which system of government is best for that? And I suggest nothing that I've heard here convinces me other than that to have a dynamic, innovative, productive economy that evolves over time, democracy is the best thing we've found, because otherwise there are problems of legitimacy, either of this monarchical CEO or of his board of directors or whatever, and you have revolts and people wanting to exit, not complying with these orders or that orders. Fundamentally, it's a category error. It's just like people who analogize the president to the father of the country or something like this. We're not a family. In my family, we have communism. I have these rules, and the kids have to follow them. If they don't, they get in trouble. And we don't vote on the rules.
That's Stalinism, actually, I think, but go on.
Anyway, we have family communism, but there's different units, right? Corporate governance, there's different models of corporate governance. But the point is, for national governance to produce this economic growth and to maximize economic growth, again, the stipulation that you want capitalism, there hasn't been a system of government designed yet. Until we have Jason Brennan, my friend at Georgetown, who talks about epistocracy, right? Rule by the experts. I don't know. All of these Platonic ideals ultimately descend into collapse. Monarchy collapses into tyranny, aristocracy into oligarchy, democracy into ochlocracy. So how do you prevent that? How do you, who guards the guardians and all that, and the fundamental problem of political theory. And again, I go back to call it democracy, democratic republicanism, whatever the case might be. He can have a sir rebuttal for the amount of time that I spoke if he wants.
Sure. So let me get to the most interesting question, which is how you do accountability at a sovereign level. And this is going to sound hokey and nerdy, and I apologize for it. So the thing is, you want to duplicate the board of directors system, because that's the, even though, the absolute system or even the hereditary system, which frankly seems to have done fine for pretty much all of human history, other than the last 200 years, which is like, excuse me, the British Empire, the 210, I guess.
What about the War of the Roses? Henry VIII, Mary I, Charles I, George III, Edward VIII, all not very good.
Well, they're pretty, imagine what any of those people would say if they could see Austin today. I think they'd have some comments. What do you think they'd say?
That's some good music. What kind of harpsichord is that?
I'm sure that would be the first thing they thought. Absolutely, and no question about it. And so, when you consider, this question of accountability, so for example, the hereditary system takes advantage of the fact that people naturally feel responsible to their families. And so, the nation is family, the nation is something inherited, the nation under God, because traditionally kings were religious. World War II is kind of the first war between atheistic dictators. I would basically be very against having an atheistic CEO. I think it's just, why? Because he should feel that, a CEO on earth is fine, but a CEO of a sovereign nation should feel responsible to God. Even if God doesn't exist, he feels responsible to God. Same thing. If he thinks God is going to strike him down with a lightning bolt, and he doesn't do the bad shit that would make God strike him down with a lightning bolt, I don't care if there's no God at all. It worked. So the thing is, you're just looking for a system that works. And, that's where you see the hereditary system actually working really quite well historically. Of course, in Rome, you have the five good emperors, where Mark, Gibbon is like, this is the best government ever experienced, by humanity. My private theory about the five good emperors is that they were actually the five gay emperors. There was kind of a long-standing gay sex ring, basically, that they adopted. You're adopting a man who's 30 years younger than you. Right. So maybe that was going on. That's a system of accountability.
It's a fabulous system.
And then it worked for like 140 years, And then if all the monarchs have to be gay, it's great. As Deng Xiaoping said, who cares if the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice? Or as Pope said, Alexander Pope, the poet, for forms of government, let fools contest. Whatever governs best is best. All right, I didn't get to the goofy blockchain idea, and that's probably for the best. Let this guy hit the gavel, and we can be done.
Now let's go to the Q&A. Corbin, who's standing right there, will go to anyone who holds their hand up, time permitting, of course, and let them ask a question.
This is a question for Mr. Shapiro. What makes you think that being an enemy of America makes a country not democratic? And I would like to bring up the examples of South American elected socialist regimes that were couped by the CIA, like Chile and Guatemala.
I don't think I asserted that being an enemy of America makes them not democratic.
I think you did.
Did
Because
I?
the alternative is to say to be not democratic makes you an enemy of America, which you would expect to knock off some hit points in the era of American supremacy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, each nation should pursue its own interests, and it was in America's interest to have democracies that would be more friendly rather than autocracies that would be less friendly.
But it was also in the Soviet Union's interest to have communist satellite states that would be more friendly.
Absolutely.
So is there kind of a resemblance between the Brezhnev Doctrine and the Monroe Doctrine there, would you say?
Well, the doctrine that the Soviet near abroad or the Russian near abroad has to be under their sphere. That's,
like once you go communist, you never go back. That's the
Right.
Brezhnev Doctrine. Once you go democratic, you never go back. That's kind of our modern
well,
version
I think
of the
they'd
Monroe
just like
Doctrine.
to be friendly. I mean, was Pinochet democratic? He was more friendly to the U.S. than the socialist, right?
I think Pinochet is sort of, most people would categorize Pinochet as a more, kind of Hitler-like regime. Almaty was obviously a lot better than Hitler. There's a continuum from Hitler to Franco.
Hitler was liberal fascism. That's Jonah Goldberg, right?
Yeah, like, I'm sorry, but the two of us can join together in perfect amity in saying that anyone who believes in the doctrine that Hitler was left-wing cannot be taken seriously as a student of history.
It's National Socialism.
I've heard that.
By the way, I'm surprised that you kept going off about China when I think the better example would be like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore.
Oh, an even better example, but
Okay.
I didn't want to make it too easy.
My question is for Mr. Yarvin. Okay, you have convinced me. I would like my friend Jacob here to be king. I would like him to be our monarch. How do I go about installing him?
Wow. That's a rough question. I would say overwhelmingly, it's a pity we didn't get to talk about constitutional law, because I have an opinion about constitutional law, which is probably not taught in most constitutional law schools. My view is that the founders very intentionally left the precedence of the branches unspecified. And they did that because they intended to create a system that would last forever. And they knew, being very practical people, that this is also why they put the power to suspend habeas corpus in the Constitution. Like, why the hell is that? Why is it hell is it in there? I mean, at least Congress, has to pass a rule before it suspends habeas corpus. The president could just do it. There's nothing in the presidential article about any limits on suspending habeas corpus. And sorry, I was just.
It's generally accepted that Lincoln acted extra-constitutionally in suspending habeas corpus, and the debate is over whether he was justified in doing that.
Exactly. So the thing is, the fact that there's a debate, shows that it's possible. And what we see in American, broadly speaking, the practice of American constitutional history is we see actually this oscillation in the supremacy of the branches, where essentially every 75 or 80 years, we have a condition of near presidential supremacy. So the thing is, look at the relationship between FDR and the court. He's ready to basically use his rubber stamp Congress to smash it. They'll approve anything else he wants to do. They won't quite go there. And then you have the switch in time that saves 9. Certainly, FDR runs the country like a CEO, runs the government like a CEO, as does Lincoln, and as does the team of
If you're
Hamilton and
using
Washington.
CEO for a synonym for like dictator or imperial president or something.
Yeah, just top down. FDR's, what
Okay, but
powers did FDR
the
not
imperial
have?
presidency, it's not like it kind of went down after FDR.
Oh, no.
It's kind of continued to grow.
So I believe that the executive branch has grown, but the control of the chief executive over the executive branch has fallen enormously.
Now you're arguing about unitary executive theory? I'm sorry, we're getting far afield. She asked how to make Jacob king. How do you do that?
Very simple. We'll start by electing him president, so you'll have to wait at least 25 years or something like that. And then do it.
Corbin, next question.
We'll have one more membership question, and then we'll open it up to faculty.
I have a question for Mr. Yarvin. You mentioned a couple times that you would need accountability is very important, and multiple times you mentioned the importance of tying morality to that. So I would ask, there are multiple structures of ethics. For instance, a utilitarian ethics, which focuses primarily on situational, the situational part of John Frank's perspective triangle of ethics. So what type of ethical framework do you think is best for a monarchic society?
Well, a utilitarian ethics is ultimately a hedonic or a hedonistic ethics, especially in our modern world. So I don't really support that. I would say that, you don't really have a difference among the ethical frameworks of major religions. It's like if you conceive of every religion as kind of a body of myth attached to a working system of ethics, basically, there aren't any real Satanists. All of these religions basically tell you to be basically good. And I think that similarly in the pre-modern world, the idea of what a good Chinese emperor was and the idea of what a good Roman emperor was pretty similar. And anyone in the Tang dynasty would be like, well, Marcus Aurelius, there was a good emperor. Commodus, not so good. You wouldn't even have to see the film, right? And similarly, basically, I think any Roman could judge Chinese emperors and basically say, well, this guy's good at his job, this guy's not. So, essentially, again, and the Chinese are not even really
Were the
religious
Romans
persons.
capitalists?
The Romans actually came, I think, a somewhat separate question. The Romans, I think, actually, just as the ancient world came very close to steam engines and an industrial revolution, I think they came very close to the joint stock company revolution because they had relatively they had relatively sophisticated financial systems, but they did not invent the joint stock company.
Corbin?
Another question from the faculty?
I just think all those pre-modern examples are inapposite one way or another.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for the debate. I'm Professor Tim Kaine, Professor of Economics at UATX. So
He's going to tell us what we all got wrong about the economic portion.
He's going to tell us that really Buddhism and
that would
economics
take too
do
long,
agree.
guys. So,
No, Buddhism, that's like the pizza shop when you go and ask for one with everything.
my students today were talking with me about value and utility, so it's great to hear that brought up. But, it's interesting. China's GDP, I think now maybe rivals America in sheer size, but the relevant metric is GDP per capita. So in China, it's about $16,000 per person. Here in the US, it's about $50,000. That seems to end the debate right there. And I would think that China's GDP is kind of at our pleasure. And that's about to be shut down, I think, because if they're exploiting and spying. So there's so much wealth and prosperity. And then maybe if you were to ask about, peace in the world, most countries are peaceful, either are the United States or have American troops there that have deterred wars. So I don't understand why there would be any suspicion or question that America's democracy is the best. It's proven to be the best. And the question is to you, Mr. Yarvin, what country that's a monarchy has been successful in doing anything more than catching up? Have they innovated more than us? Have they invented new things that haven't been invented here, and anything close to what we have with our free democracy?
Simple question. Let me answer the second question first. I have a lot of examples, but since we're speaking English here, I'm just going to go for the monarchy of one of my favorite kings, Charles II, in which, for example, the Royal Society was founded, Newton did his work, and so on and so forth. If you're going to restrict your examples to the last 200 years, it's funny, I was talking with Apano, just this morning, and we mentioned a word that historians use sometimes, which is presentism, i.e. basically the sort of othering of the past and the refusal to accept it as an even relevant example. And I sort of feel this term isn't strong enough. I would say present supremacism. So as a present supremacist, obviously, you've othered Charles II, and he doesn't matter at all. When it comes to basically the GDP and the relative productivity of China and America, you can look at numbers all day. What I simply would like to say is that basically when I look at realities on the ground, remembering my Trenton example, when I look at realities on the ground, what I see is that, America, you know what America is economically? America is Argentina, plus a reserve currency, plus nukes, plus Silicon Valley and Hollywood. Anything else is nothing. You can throw it away. It's toilet paper. And so given the fact that I think we'll probably stay ahead in Hollywood, I'm not looking for Hollywood to be outcompeted by Chinese movies anytime soon. When I see the great citadels of capitalism that don't have what the Chinese have, SpaceX, TSMC, oh wait, that's in China, according to official US policy, and ASML, which is basically American technology, even though it's in the Netherlands. Those are the things that the Chinese don't have, and they're working very hard on getting them. And so when you basically, again, refer to this GDP, what you're talking about is how much fun can the government buy for its citizens. Well, we're buying a lot of fun for our citizens. We're running a trade deficit with China of something like $1 trillion. What's our trade deficit with China? It's not all that. It's like 600 billion, something like that. Donald Trump, for all his faults, seems to have a very clear economic
Trade deficits don't matter. Deficits do. And America may go have the Argentina parallel, and I thought this is where you were going with it, with the debt and what that looming cliff is going.
I can't disagree more. I think trade deficits are super important because of the P&L of nations. Actually, the problem that we have is when you have the world's reserve currency, deficits don't matter. And that is actually a very serious problem because that is preventing us from needing to break even, which is a force that Argentina has holding it together. We actually can borrow our way to infinity, at least until Bitcoin becomes the global reserve currency, then we're pretty host. As far as America's thriving economy, let me tell a story. So in April 2021, after my wife passed, I was like, what do I do? And I drove across the country both ways with my, teenage, preteen children. And we're driving back across the country, and I'm tired of Jack in the Box. And I look at the map, and there's a town called Russell, Kansas, about 10 miles off the freeway. And Russell, Kansas, on paper, in statistics, a flourishing town, the hometown of Senator and former Vice President Bob Dole. I'm like, let's go to Russell and find a restaurant and have lunch. We drive through Russell. I cannot find even a restaurant, anything living on the streets of Russell. It is like it's Tuesday. It's the middle of the day. It's like a nuclear bomb is going off there. Yes, it was still kind of COVID-y, but it was like a nuclear bomb had gone off in Russell, Kansas, and there were no restaurants. We had to drive to near the freeway to go to a restaurant. And, the thing is, the condition of, there's this thing where you compare the condition of Hiroshima in 1945 and the condition of Detroit in 1945 to their present condition. Oh my God, right? The thing is just, you're seeing ruin. So, when you basically see, the world through statistics, there's something that Thomas Carlyle, there's a great paper of Thomas Carlyle's, it's in the essay Chartism, but it's the condition of England. But other places have
flourished. I don't think Detroit's decline is due to insufficient economic command and control from Washington.
No, I think it's due to democracy. It seems to have happened under democracy. I mean, you're comparing China to, the U.S. The U.S. starts in 1945 with democracy.
You don't
and
think
Detroit
President
as
CEO would have sold Detroit for scrap to private equity?
Private equity would probably do something better with it, to be honest.
I'm Patrick Gray. I'm the Dean of Arts and Letters here at the University of Boston. I've got a question for you, Mr. Yarvin. In terms of the question posed under debate, it would be about, we could say, other kinds of capital, like social capital, political capital. To put it in kind of terms of intellectual history, I'm talking about what Hegel or maybe the early Marx would call subjective alienation. And what I mean is, it seems like sometimes when we're talking about utility or maximizing assets, there's a very reductive materialistic understanding of that in play. And what if the asset to be maximized is something like agency, ownership, the self-esteem that comes with a feeling of being a citizen and meaningfully participating in one's own governance. That human desire seems like it would be very difficult to fulfill in a polity in which all power had been devolved to a CEO or a board of directors. So I'm curious how you fit that kind of human desire into your picture of the ideal society.
Great question. So you're referring to, this is the same question in some ways that Abraham Lincoln asked in his Lyceum speech, where he spoke of, how does the system of government that we have, of course he was talking about how to constrain it, not how to use it. How does our system of government, handle, and he said, men of the tribe of the lion and the family of the eagle. Amazing order, right? And so the thing is, first of all, what you're describing in terms of sort of the human need for meaning, you're probably familiar with Maslow's pyramid of needs, where the most basic need of a human being is air. If you don't have enough air, you don't give a crap about anything else. Then it goes to water, food, sex, and so on and so forth. And what you see in all his societies historically is that the aristocracy, the ruling class, the top people in the system, there's no system of equality that has ever existed. And the top people in the system are always at the top of Maslow's pyramid of needs. So, and one of the needs at the top is this need for, people describe it normally in the way you did, very elliptically, is the desire for power. And so essentially you're like, okay, what happens to the desire for power in a monarchy? Okay, and the answer is very simple. You rise within that, that pyramid-shaped org chart. You can, if you want power, go into the army. You can become a general. You also have subsidiary structures called capitalism and companies. You want power, become a VP, become a founder, become a CEO. You think those people, don't have their sense of power and meaning satisfied? What? Right, and so actually there are a lot of outlets for this trait. The outlet that we actually, apply currently is actually, I think, actually a pretty terrible outlet in terms of, the subjective value of the individual. We give them fake power. We basically let them, vote for president and pretend the president is in control of the government, which is basically like letting people in England vote for, King Charles III. Imagine if you had an election to elect the King of England and he had just the same powers that the King of England has today, is a royal celebrity, probably, essentially a crown Kardashian. Maybe Kim Kardashian would even win. You'd have President Kardashian, the symbol of, she's not even British, but what does it matter, nor was George I, and, you'd get the same thrills out of it, and it would be totally BS. And that's, in effect, what we've done. When people basically participate in politics, they're using the same part of their brain with which they become sports fans.
Corbin, I think we have time for one more question.
Then I'll take my privilege and ask the final question. Professor Shapiro, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Yarvin said that the purpose of governments is to maximize the value of the assets. Do you buy that?
I mean, a lot is hanging on those definitions.
Exactly.
If you define assets as, the value of all real estate, property, cash holdings in the country, I'm not sure that's right.
Well, it's missing the human capital.
Okay, so you're valuing, anyway, no, I think the purpose of government is to allow, set the conditions for maximal human flourishing, period.
Thank you both for coming out tonight. Constantine is going to deliver some brief final remarks, and then everyone here is free to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for debating tonight. Great job. Thanks also to everybody tonight who attended. Turnout was much higher than expected, but we won't complain, and we hope to also in the future host more of these debates that are thought-provoking and inspiring as well. Please find us on our website, austinunion.org, and register for future debates. Next week, we have Ed Luttwak and Michael Duran coming, debating whether the Middle East is strategically important. Tonight, we're going to call it a night now, and thank you so much for coming all. Thanks.
Thanks.